Good morning, still good morning, colleagues, dear friends. I'm happy to open this second session of the conference, which concentrates on the formating years or a century of the Converso problem or phenomenon. This session is called the first generation of Conversos Confronting Politics. We have here with us three prominent scholars who dealt with the subject from various angles. Our first presenter is Shalom Sadik, who completed his doctoral studies at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev in 2011. His dissertation the topic was the Trinity and Determinism in the Philosophy of Abner of Burgos. And that year he began his postdoctoral studies in Tel Aviv University's Cohen Institute. Dr. Shalom Sadik has published many academic articles, and his first book on the essence of free will in medieval Jewish philosophy will be published next years in Magnus Press. He has received many prizes for his research, including the Pinus Prize, the Toledano Prize for doctoral candidates, and the Jewish National Fine Prize in Philosophy and the Warburg Prize. The topic is, he's also a member of the Polonsky Academy at the Leer Jerusalem Institute, and the topic is political criticism against Judaism among Spanish Medieval Converted Rabbis.
Thank you for the invitation. I begin. Between the 12th and 15th century, a substantial number of Spanish rabbis and other prestigious members of the intellectual elite of the Jewish community rejected the faith in favor of Christianity. Following their conversion, they tried to propagate their new belief amongst their former co-religionists. Such proselytizing was implanted in a number of ways, including public debate and writing in Hebrew, Latin, and Old Spanish. The phenomenon of intellectual apostate played an important role in the mass conversion to Christianity that occurred in the end of the 14th and through to until 15th century. So it is spread that this phenomenon, that by the beginning of the 16th century, the majority of the Spanish Jewish community had converted to Christianity. The primary tool used by the ideological and intellectual conversos to influence the Jewish community was their writing. We sought to convince Jewish readers to adopt a similarly ideological Christian theology. This evangelical writing also provided an ideological fig leaf for less intellectual Jews who sought justification for their conversion. Moreover, the very awareness of the enforced nature of the conversion of so many respected rabbis and well-versed communal leaders itself almost certainly had a major impact on the Jewish community. While other Jewish community held deep revolution for Trinitarian Christianity as a form of paganism, the ongoing public phenomenon of Spanish Jewish scholars converting to Christianity out of ideological consideration served to suppress within the Spanish Jewry such revolution from Christianity, thereby making Spanish Jewry all the more vulnerable to the already existing external pressure, both physical and economic, to convert. No such ideologically motivated apostasy existed in Ashkenaz, and this is one of the major reasons for the difference in rate of conversion between the two communities. In examining the phenomena of ideological apostasy in Spain, two very interesting questions arise. Why were Spanish rabbis so much more predisposed to conversion than their Ashkenazi colleagues? And what was the nature of their ideology? My focus is on the latter question, the answer to which turned out to be far more intriguing than the simplicity of the question suggests. For true one may assume that the ideology of the apostate was fairly monolithic. In reality, there were very important differences between the apostate, both in reason for their conversion as well in their criticism of the Jewish religion and community. In this lecture, I will broadly describe the two major areas of the criticism of Judaism, the theological and the political. My main argument will be that on the theological level, the criticism of Judaism and their definition of Christianity are completely different and even contradictory. By contrast, the criticism of Judaism on the political issue underlying the keeping of a Jewish religion obligation and ritual are almost identical. The main topic of a Judeo-Christian debate are the same in the vast majority of this dispute, regardless of whether or not the Christian disputant hailed from a Jewish background. By far and away, the most important theological subject of this debate are the question of Trinity and Incarnation, and so for this reason, I focus my analysis of the theological opinion of the apostate on these two subjects, especially the question of Trinity. As for the purely political issues, the major subject that appear in all this debate is the question of the need to continue to practice the practical part of the Jewish law. In this speech, I focus on 5 important ideological conversos from the 12th century, Petrus Alfonsi, from the 14th century, Abner of Burgos and Pablo de Santa Maria, and from the 15th century, Geronimo de Santa Fe and Pedro de la Calabria. Petrus Alfonsi converted in Huesca, Aragon at the beginning of the 12th century, probably around 1106. Petrus devoted the 6th chapter of his Dialogos contra Judeos to the confirmation of Christianity. In the beginning of the chapter, he offered his definition of Trinity before trying to prove the truth of the concept. I quote, "I want to call the three persons substance, wisdom, and will. Moreover, I name the first person substance for the following reason. Because wisdom and will are in it and come from it, will it itself come from nothing else, as to there are three persons, all are one substance." In this text, we clearly see Petrus' definition of Trinity. The Father is identified as God's substance, the Son as God's wisdom, and the Holy Spirit as God's wills. With definition is that to say the less very unorthodox from a Catholic point of view, for two reasons. First, will Petrus identify the Trinity with God's attributes, some of the most important post-Nicene fathers of the Church, as well as the scholastic of the Middle Ages, try to do precisely the opposite by distinguishing between the Trinity and God's attribute, which they held are the attribute of the entire Godhead, and which can thus be attributed to each one of the different persons of the Trinity. Indeed, during the very same decade that Petrus wrote his Dialogus, Peter Albalar got into all kinds of trouble after constructing him a very similar theory which identified the person of Trinity with God's attributes. Albalar's ideas were condemned by the Synod of Soissons in 1121 and by the Pope himself in the 1141. The second and most important unorthodox part of Petrus' definition of Trinity is the complete destruction of the equality between the different persons of the Trinity. According to the regular dogma of the Catholic Church, all the persona have an equal relation to God's substance, whereas in the description of Petrus, only the Father is identical with God's substance. Therefore, the Son and Holy Spirit are relegated to the role of some particular attribute of the Father. This opinion is consequently an example of a subordinationist heresy according to the post-Nicene Catholic Church. Petrus expressed his criticism of the Jewish practical obligation in the 4th and 12th chapter on his dialogues. In the 4th chapter, Petrus argued that the religion's obligation of the law of Moses cannot lead to the fulfillment of God's will. Petrus gives two arguments. First, if God wanted the Jew to be able to practice all his law, he would not have exiled them from their land to a place in which they cannot fulfill important part of his law. Second, even according to the opinion of a Jew, the law of Moses continued to be necessary for human salvation. Yet, after the exile, they cannot fulfill all the law, and therefore they cannot be saved. The conclusion is that the Jew had to guard the legal institution not according to the letter that kills, but according to the life-giving spirit. In the 12th and last chapter of his dialogue, Petrus analyzes a list of Jewish obligations and maintains that while having a certain role in the pre-salvation period, they are completely obsolete after the coming of Jesus. He concentrated his criticism on the following commandments: circumcision, Shabbat, Passover, and the fast of the Day of Atonement, the sacrifice of the dietary law. For example, the aim of circumcision was to distinguish between the Jewish people from other nations. After the coming of Jesus and the salvation of all humanity through baptism and faith, all forms of separation between different nations are obsolete. In the same way, the sacrifice of Passover is also obsolete, given that its unique aim has been supplanted by the symbolism of Jesus' sacrifice to serve all humankind. Moreover, after the effective communion of God in the flesh, no more sacred symbol of his future coming, such as the Paschal lamb, as per Christian interpretation, are necessary. Petrus also explained that before the coming of Jesus, the meat of impure animal has a bad influence on the human body. Nonetheless, after the salvation of humankind and the cleanness of human flesh by the sacrifice of God, impure meat no longer has a negative influence. Avner of Burgos. Avner of Burgos, Alfonso de Valladolid, approximately 1216 3047, was perhaps the most important philosopher in the stream of Jewish rabbi apostate. The first major topics of his theological criticism of Judaism are the Trinity and Incarnation. They are, in fact, the two major subjects of his philosophical polemical work of Avner. Avner had an original take on Trinity. In his opinion, one can prove the reality of the Trinity philosophically. He claimed that only the division of the divine source of the world can explain the diversity of the world. The infinite force of God, the Father, will burn the finite matter of the world if it were not from some transformer that adapted the divine force to the finitude of matter. This transformer is the Son. Avner distinguished between two parts of the Son. The superior Son is part of the transcendent divinity, while the inferior Son is the divine essence in all the different parts of the world. The transformer of the divine force and essence is the superior Son. Regarding the theory of divine attribute, here too, Avner's opinion is original. It distinguishes between the attributes that are the essence of God and the attributes that are essential to God. The attribute of the essence of God divides itself only within the person of Trinity. The rest of the attributes are only essential to God and could be attributed to any one of the persona. Avner's opinion of divine incarnation was also very original. According to Avner, the essence of God is in the entire world. The world is composed only of matter and of divine essence in different degrees of purity. Even the most corrupted matter has some divine essence inside itself. The divine essence gives a corporal form to matter and produces the dimension within it. The uniqueness of human being is the capacity to purify one's matter, thereby reaching a higher degree of divine essence. According to Avner, what made Jesus unique among human beings was what he was born in the highest matter, enabling him to unite within the highest degree of divine essence, what a human can attain. Avner thought that the superior Son does not incarnate in this world. Jesus was only the highest degree of the inferior Son that is present in the essence of the entire world. We can see that his opinion regarding the Trinity and Incarnation contradicts the official dogma of the Catholic Church at the time of Avner. In his opinion, the incarnation of divinity in Jesus did not bypass the regular process of the emanation of a divine essence in the world. Rather, the manifestation of Jesus represents the pinnacle of a divine incarnation, which was indeed present in the entire world. In Jesus occurred in the purest form possible. This opinion of Avner, similar to his other philosophical view, was a part of his radical Neoplatonic interpretation of Christianity. Avner presents his argument for a new law in the second and third chapter of the Mostrador, his major work. In this chapter, he essentially argues that the law of Moses is inferior to the law of Jesus in terms of metaphysical knowledge, and he calls Jewish sources that speak of a need for a new revelation and the cancellation of the law of Moses in the time of the Mashiach. He also makes a distinction between the ceremonial and the moral law within the Moses revelation. According to Avner, only the moral law are eternal, while the ceremonial law are only useful before the coming of Jesus. In the third and last chapter of his major work, Mostrador de Justico, Avner focuses his criticism on the practical aspects of the Jewish law. In this chapter, Avner criticizes Jewish law and argues in favor of a higher level of morality of Christian law. The majority of its chapter is composed of an enumeration of the entire litany of Jewish religion obligation as per the Mishneh Torah of Maimonides in all the classes of the commandment. Avner argues that the law of a Christian are better than the religion obligation of a Jew. For example, he explained that after the incarnation, human nature changed as such the law regarding spiritual purity and impurity had to be cancelled. In addition, he looked at as ethical issue, especially the relation of Jew to members of other religion, including the degree of proof that Talmudic demand in order to condemn a Jew versus a non-Jew, and the permission given to Jew to loan an interest to non-Jew but not to their Jewish person. Pablo de Santa Maria. Shlomo Alevi, later known as Pablo de Santa Maria, was born in Burgos around 1353. Pablo dealt with Trinity at the end of the first part of the beginning of the second part of his Scriptum Scriptutarium, and in some place in his Additiones. Pablo was probably the only Conversos rabbi to acquire 3 in-depth Christian theological knowledge after his conversion. He was also the lone intellectual Converso whose position on Trinity reflected the existing Christian theological stance on this subject. At the end of his first part of the Scriptum Scriptutarium, Pablo argued, like Thomas Aquinas in the introduction to end the beginning of the fourth part of his Summa Contra Genti, that it is impossible to prove philosophically the existence of the Trinity. Pablo only tried to establish the philosophical possibility of the Trinity. The second step of his argument is the scriptural proof of the existence of Trinity, which he presented in the second part of his Scriptum Scriptutarium. In general, the emphasis of the religious writing of Pablo is not on the philosophical or theological level, but more on the scriptural level. On the question of the definition of the Trinity, Pablo based himself essentially on Thomas Aquinas, whose position he simplifies. Pablo presents his criticism of the law of Moses in the 8th part of the first chapter of the Scriptum Scriptutarium. In this dialogue, Pablo used essentially the same argument that Avner used previously. He quotes some Jewish sources that affirm the changing of the law in the time of the Messiah, and then determining that the law of Moses was appropriate just for a specific period in history. He also adopts in the manner of Avner and Thomas Aquinas the distinction between the religious obligation of the law of Moses, between the ephemeral ceremonial commandment and the eternal moral commandment. Pablo also adopted from Aquinas the notion of a natural law, and claimed that only the Christian law is natural and therefore eternal. By contrast, the law of Moses is only ceremonial and consequently limited to a specific time, people, and geographic era. In the third part of the second chapter of his polemical work, he also argued that one of the major aims of the sacrifice is to symbolize the future sacrifice of Jesus, and such after his coming, the sacrifices are then rendered obsolete. Geronimo de Santa Fe, the fourth one. Geronimo de Santa Fe, born Yoshua Lorki, lived in Aragon at the end of the 14th century and the beginning of the 15th century, approximately 3073, 4090. He was the physician of the antipode Benedict XIII, of whom Geronimo requested the organization of a disputation with the Jew. So it was that Geronimo became the main Christian speaker in the dramatic as well traumatic disputation of Tortosa. In connection to this debate, Benedict asked Geronimo to put his argument in writing, and this led to the creation of 2 polemical tracts. One called Erroris Falsidal de Talmud exists also in Latin, translated De Geodisos Hieronymus ex Talmud, and as the little title suggested, is primarily an attack on the Jewish oral law. The second treatise doesn't actually have a clear name, so the various editions assign it different titles through its popularly known as Contra Perfidum Judaeum. In this work, Geronimo deals mainly with the question related to the definition and nature of the Messiah, as well as issues related to the coming of the Messiah. The 5th chapter of this book addressed the question of the essence of the Messiah, and is almost entirely comprised of the interpretation of biblical passages and the Jewish oral law, that are supposed to convince a Jew that through he be a man on flesh and blood, the essence of the Messiah is divine. In this book, and in all the polemics of Geronimo, philosophical arguments are completely absent. The probable reason for this phenomenon is that Geronimo believed that the entire difference between Judaism and Christianity depended on the question of the coming of the Messiah. In his opinion, all the philosophical division will resolve themselves if the Jew accepts that the Messiah has already come. Moving on to this more political objection to Judaism, we think that Geronimo dedicated the 9th chapter of his book on the Messiah, just as he did in the 1st and 6th chapter of his Eroses Falsedal del Talmud, to the criticism of a Jewish practical obligation. Here he quotes passages from the oral law, including some of the lost corruptos of Rabbi Moshe the Exeget, and from Maimonides' Guide of the Perplexed, to prove the need for a new law to be given by the Messiah that will improve upon the law of Moses. For example, Geronimo argued that the sacrifices are just step along the way to the emancipation of Israel from idolatry. The final law will be free of any kind of concession to the idolatrous habit of the past. In the 1st chapter of the Eros Falsedad del Talmud, Geronimo argued that the Jewish obligations are contradictory to the law of the nature. For example, he cited, as did Avner, the ruling that a group of people commit murder together, but not single one of them is by himself responsible for the death, then none are to be executed. In the 6th chapter and last chapter of Eros Falsedal del Talmud, Geronimo directs his criticism to the relationship of a Jew to the Christian. In this chapter, he gives some examples, some of them are also present in the discussion of Avner, of the poor treatment according by Jewish oral law to non-Jew. For example, he criticizes the interdiction to sell and rent oaths to non-Jew. The last one, Pedro de la Calabria. Pedro de la Calabria, born Bonafos Calabria, died in 1464. Whose analysis will be based on his sole exempt work, Zelus Christis contra Judeos Saranessos and Gentiles. Before describing Pedro's theology, it should be duly noted that several times in Zelus Christi he asserts that all religions have some rationally difficult to accept belief, that the believer had to accept through faith, and the Trinity is a perfect example. In keeping with his outlook, Pedro states that the Christians have to believe in Trinity solely on the authority of the Bible, and present argument from the Trinity based on his interpretation of the Scriptures, and not on metaphysical conjuncture. He explained the Trinity using a theory with some similarity to Augustine's concept of a vestige of a Trinity, which holds that the Trinity tends to manifest itself in the world, especially in the human soul. The main difference between his opinion and the opinion of Augustine is that Pedro only speaks of two divisions of the human soul, the amour and the intellect. These two divisions are parallel to the Holy Spirit and the Son as Augustine. Pedro never speaks on the third part of the vestige, the parallel between the Father and memory. It is possible that Pedro changed or did not understand the position of Augustine, and true that the substantia of God is the vestige of the Father as manifest in memory. This change is a major modification of Augustine's original opinion. Pedro devotes a number of discussions through his polemical work to the cancellation of the law of Moses and his obligation. He first asserts that the law of Moses does not offer the possibility of life after death of a body. He also mentioned several times that a new law has to be given in the time of the Messiah. He also specifically discuss the nullification of certain specific obligations. In his argument regarding the Shabbat, he asserts that all the ritual obligations are nullified after the coming of Jesus. Nevertheless, he accepts that the remembrance of the creation of the Shabbat retains its relevance through after the coming of Jesus. It is more important to remember his miracles, incarnation and resurrection, and therefore the weekly holiday have to move to Sunday. He similarly argued in favor of the substitution of circumcision by baptism. On the subject of the dietary obligation of the law of Moses, he quotes, like the other apostate, part of the oral law that mentions the nullification of this law in the Messianic era. Conclusion: in this lecture, we have encountered 5 very diverse conversos who understand the metaphysical essence of a new religion very differently from one another. In our summary of the opinion and argument, we see some very dissimilar and even contradictory opinions regarding the Trinity. Petrus Alfonsi identified the Son and Father with the attribute of wisdom and will. God's substance is classified with the Father. Avner proposed a radical Neoplatonic view on Trinity, in which a dichotomous Son represents the transformer of a divine essence, which allows that powerful essence to coexist with this world. Pedro proposed an interpretation based on Augustine's theory on the vestige of Trinity in the world, incorporating some fundamental change that again put the father in a different status than the other person. These three opinions are very different and contradictory. About the only similarity between them is that they are all very different from the official dogma of the Christian Church. By contrast, the only rabbi apostate who fully understood and adopted the standard Christian definition of Trinity was Pablo de Santa Maria. Finally, Geronimo never exactly explained his definition, and thus we cannot properly classify his position. What we can determine is that the only commonality between the five apostates regarding their view of Trinity is their acceptance of a most basic credo, one substance and three persons. This point does not contradict my argument about the apostate difference, because the acceptance of an official credo is merely a part of a political definition of a religion, and as such is no way limit of different thinkers relate to whose credo, nor how they explain their metaphysical implication. So we see that even in the realm of a religion, the ritual and language that adherents use to express their belief are in reality a part of a political activity in the broadest sense of the term. It is only with regard to the considered and detailed opinion about their belief that they encounter the metaphysical perspective. They completely disagreed about the essence of the very Christian dogma that they wished to spread among their former co-religionists. Yet, when we focused on the political difference between Judaism and Christianity, we see that the five apostates were in accord in all the essential. They all argue for the abandonment of a religious obligation of the law of Moses, using arguments that are quite similar and certainly never contradictory. They all posit the immorality of the law of the Talmud, the radical change of humanity after the incarnation, the self-imposed time limit on the applicability of the law of Moses and the Talmud, and the esoteric meaning of certain religion obligation as symbolizing the future coming of sacrifice of Jesus. Some of the apostates addressed all these arguments with other only mentioned certain one. In any case, we can conclude that the different apostates share in common the same definition of a political difference between Judaism and Christianity, but totally disagree about the metaphysical underpinning of this difference. Another interesting point that we have known to mention despite not having the time to properly demonstrate it, and which I'll allude to earlier in explaining how politically homogeneous groups can nevertheless be metaphysically disparate, is that there are some Jews who continue to be Jewish rabbis and scholars even though they accept some of metaphysical definition of the apostate. The most obvious example of this kind of metaphysical crossover can be seen in the case of Rabbi Chizai Kreskas, who adopted some of Avner's arguments surrounding the Trinity and integrated them into his own definition of divinity, even though he continued to be the head of the Jewish opposition to Christian propaganda in this time. Had Avner decided to continue to be a Jew, he could have interpreted Judaism like Kreskas according to his metaphysical opinion, without converting to Christianity per se. However, probably because of his political revision to Judaism, and in particular to the ritual commandment, he decided to convert to Christianity. We can conclude that carefully examining the metaphysical aspect of each Conversos Rabbis polemics is a key for understanding the philosophical or theological opinion of any given Conversos. On the other hand, the ideology of apostasy that was collectively created by the intellectual converts of Middle Spain was not metaphysical in character, but was rather a political critique of Judaism that especially focused on its obligatory ritual and practice. Thank you very much.